One of the highlights, frankly, amongst many of last year's EntreConf was an exceptional upending of thought, that's my phrase, not his, by Professor Dimo Dimov of the University of Bath School of Management. So profound was the session on kinetic thinking, and please do check it on our EntreConf YouTube channel, that we invited Dimo back. So here to talk about multiple things about how we can teach entrepreneurialism, we can learn to be a deeper entrepreneur, about the time tensions, the dualities of entrepreneurs, of the balance between tactics and strategy, of immediacy and long term, of how they need to keep their eyes on the horizon yet feet on the ground. Welcome, Dimo Dimov. Dimo, how are you this afternoon?
Thank you, Greg. Very well, thank you. I'm
Good.
at the sunny and hot Black Sea coast of Bulgaria, so it's great to be joining in.
Well, we've had Bermuda and Switzerland and various places in the UK, but it is our first time in Bulgaria. I'm going to hand to you. You've got a short, I'm sure, sort of bewilderingly good presentation, no pressure, and then we'll have a couple of questions afterwards. Floor is yours, Dimo. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and it's great to be on. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to Greg and the EntreConf team for putting another fantastic event this year. And I have to admit that Levi's story is probably a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best in sharing some thoughts with you on entrepreneurial journey, entrepreneurial success along the lines that Greg just outlined. Just share my screen here. What I'm going to talk about is this idea of entrepreneurs' game plan. So we want to step back from a story, an inspiring story like Levi's, and have a broader reflection around entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial success. And the way I'd like to start this is to think about success, but this case, success in the case of sports. And one of the things that we understand very well, that success in sports is not enough. It's not all about motivation. It's not about talent. It's not about having the skills. These are all important, but it's also about having the ability to approach a game with Ryan, not just a plan, but a set of plans. As we all understand, in a dynamic and a fast moving game, we can see how teams, they can play together and change tactics during the game. They can move from defense to offense, to one type of play to a different type of play, all in response to the demands of the game. So this is what we could say makes or breaks success, so to speak. And so what I'd like to talk about is how can we translate this idea from sports into entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial journey? How can we think about a similar idea of a game plan in this context? But first, it's probably helpful to think about what are the ways in which entrepreneurship might be a game? And I like to see this as a game between mind and world. So one of the things that we heard that in Levi's story, is one of the things we have at our disposal is our ability to imagine a different world. So this is really, really about the power of imagination and the power to say the world could be different. We would like to make it better. So we have human imagination with this great quote by Lewis Carroll: imagination is the only weapon in the war against reality. But then obviously imagination is not enough. And one of the things we quickly realize as we step in and engage and try to change the world, this is where another contemporary philosopher comes in, Mike Tyson, with his very vivid quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. So it turns out the world is this complex, it's a complex place. It's a lot of other people and players and organizations and customers. Everybody is acting, everybody's trying to change. It's really a complex system, a place that is very difficult to control. And the only thing that it does is it reacts to what we do, it reacts back. And so what we have at our disposal is the ability to reflect on what is happening, reconsider, and perhaps change our game plan, so to speak. And we'll get to the idea of a game plan very shortly. So one of the things that happens in this interplay, as I call it, between mind and world, is a set of tensions. And the first tension, and what a tension is this idea that we have to deal with two things, and it's never settled. We always have to make sure we don't veer too much on one end and don't veer too much to the other end, and try to keep things balanced and on the steady keel. And so one of the tensions that we have when it comes to success and performance in entrepreneurship is one is this idea that we have to execute, we have to deliver the results, we have to make things happen. So this is what I would call feet on the ground. And when we talk about execution, when we talk about mastery, when we talk about current value, when we talk about returns, this is about really having our feet on the ground. At the same time, entrepreneurship is a longer journey. Impact is something we'd like to see way into the future. So it is also important not just to keep our feet on the ground and look at our feet, so to speak, but we have to have our eyes on the horizon. And when we talk about discovery, when we talk about learning, when we talk about future value, investment, this is inevitably, it's about thinking about the long term. As we try and balance these two tensions, another tension that comes right in the middle of that journey, and this is something that becomes more personal, is the tension between confidence and humility. We understand well that to make things happen, we have to be confident. We have to project that confidence externally. We speak to stakeholders or investments. They wouldn't support us if we're not confident. So confidence is all about having answers, having that conviction, being assertive, and having the courage. At the same time, things are uncertain. The world is complex. Not everything is within our control. There's a lot that we don't know. So with confidence, we don't want to be overly confident. We want to balance this with the other end of that continuum, which is about humility. And humility is about having the mindset to ask questions, to admit that we might not have answers. And sometimes it's better to ask questions rather than look straight for answers. Recognizing uncertainty and the extent to which we don't know things, being inquisitive rather than stepping in with a sense that we already know what is going on. Inquisitive about understanding situations, understanding the world, understanding what we're trying to do, and having the ability to reflect on what is happening and planning our next steps. So with these things in mind, here is a broad sense of the journey, of the entrepreneurial journey, our performance space, so to speak. This is what we're trying to do as entrepreneurs. And it's in the context of this that we can talk about game plans. So as entrepreneurs, we essentially want to balance three areas. Think of them as three systems, think of them as three complex things, think of them as three balls that we try to juggle, so to speak. One is we have to have a foothold in the market. So there's the marketplace, buyers and sellers, and no one's waiting for us. We have to elbow our way in and secure a place in the market. Then there's also the organization we have to build, the venture, the group of people we try to bring in and work together to deliver and service that place in the market. So this is about building an organization. And there's also at an individual level is having the ability to perform all these, everything that is required along the way. So we have this three activities, framing, which is about seeing and deciding what place, what space we're going to occupy in the market. And that's the hinge of that is this idea of a venture concept, what our business is about, what is its place in the marketplace. There's a sense of modeling, trying to translate that concept into a blueprint, organizational blueprint for how this business is going to work, what the business model is going to be. And then there's also a question of stepping in and actually doing, following, performing on the blueprint. And if you imagine this is a dynamic map, the three hinges are not fixed, they're flexible. So our concept can change in response to what happened. We can remodel the business, we can change our blueprint, and that would call for a different set of skills. So now, given how complex that space is, how might we think about game plans? And I'd like to bring in another analogy, and that is the analogy from mathematics. This is the idea of the Cartesian system, the 3D system of coordinates. And we all understand how that works to orient ourselves in space. The three-dimensional space, the X, Y, Z, and we can have any points in that space, and we have its three coordinates, and that's enough for us to orient ourselves, to understand exactly where that point is. It also helps us understand if we pick up a different point, what it takes to get there, because that requires movement along these three dimensions. So one of the things we've done with our kinetic thinking framework and work more generally is, in this case, try to translate this idea of a 3D space orientation to a similar kind of orientation, but in this case, for entrepreneurial performance. And we'd like to call this the levers of agency. We're doers, we're trying to do things in the world, but we have these three dimensions, so to speak, of what we do. So this is the equivalent of the X, Y, and Z, so to speak, from the Cartesian coordinates. So one dimension is about where we think in terms of time. What is our opportunity frame? Are we thinking about things more in the shorter term, or we're thinking about things in a longer term basis? So that's the opportunity frame. What we call organizational culture. So this would be, what is the DNA of the organization we're trying to build? And this is about how do we approach the processes that we put in place? Is our organization is supposed to be a well-oiled machine that follows very, very strict processes and scripted procedures, and we want everybody to be tagging the line. So this is one way of thinking about processes. Or is it about bringing people together and unleashing them to follow their curiosity and creativity and their more rebellious nature, so to speak, to figure out ways to make things work? So there's a completely different ways. One, you strict on processes. The other one is bring people in and you let them figure out how to do things. The third axis, that would be the vertical in this case, is the design of the organization. So what is the organization supposed to deliver? And this is about priorities. And we can think about priorities in a couple of ways, as I would show you on the next slide. So very simple idea, three dimensions in which we act and think about what we do. And we try to map these in a sort of spatial cube in the same way that we can think about 3D coordinates. So when it comes to opportunity frames, you can think about the cube as the front side and the back side of the cube. If you like working with Rubik's Cube, this would be a very ready way to think about cubes. So front side, this is about more incremental things we can do in the short term. The backside is being more radical, so more long-term in nature and things perhaps more discontinuous with where we are. The culture or the DNA blueprint, so to speak, of the organization is about the left side and the right side of the cube. So on the left side, when we want people to follow very specific and well-defined scripts, we're thinking about cultures being compliant. So we really want compliance, bring people in and make sure that they follow what they're supposed to be doing. On the other hand, we can have a more rebellious bend and think about culture in the sense of let's bring talented people in, but leave them alone in terms of figuring out how things work. And so the design dimension is about the bottom and the top sides of the cube. And on the bottom side, this is about delivering tangible results. This is about performance in the way we understand it, outputs, goals that we set, something to be achieved. On the top side, however, we can also think about outputs in terms of insights. Sometimes what we aim to do is simply to learn new things, and in order as a way of understanding whether it's the market, whether it's another situation. And of course, when it comes to insight, there's no way of predefining what these learnings are going to be. So sometimes we set learning as a goal without knowing where exactly that would take us. So here we are, we have these three different dimensions, and we have 6 different game plans. And as you can see here, they just basically have different combinations of incremental, radical, compliant versus rebellious, and results or insights. And so these game plans, they would range from feet on the ground, which is about delivering in the short term, following tried and tested processes and delivering very concrete results or achieving specific goals, to what we have at the other end is the eyes on the horizon. So this is about thinking long-term in ways that go way beyond processes that we understand. And also it's focused on learning and insights. And one of the ways to allow us to move between feet on the ground and eyes on the horizon, we have these 4 other game plans that allows us to scale, to go from one end to the other. So window on the future and a scuba dive, as we see the bottom corner, and a yellow brick road and a recon mission, as we call them. You can see here on the screen the different combinations, but a good way to try to make sense of these 6 different game plans is to think about the ways in which we can divide them into 2 different categories, each containing 3 plans which are based on the three dimensions of agencies that I outlined earlier. So if we think about short-term versus long-term focus, doing things in the short term, achieving some specific things in the short term versus thinking for the long term in a more radical sense, then we have three game plans that are based on the short terms. One is feet on the ground, that's well familiar. A scuba dive is when we want results in the short term, but we want to go step outside of current practices or processes. Let's try other things, so that the equivalent of diving in with a limited amount of oxygen and see what is it that we can discover, new pathways for the results that we're interested in. And in a recon mission, that we can even let go of this idea of results, and we can let people on the recon mission and let them be rebellious and try new things for the purpose of delivering insights. So that's on the short-term side. And on the other side, we have the window on the future, yellow brick road, and eyes on the horizon. On the second dimension, we can think about the game plans as some focusing on compliance and the other ones focusing on letting people follow their own curiosity. So compliance is more about checklists. And on the checklist side, we have feet on the ground, again, a familiar one, window to the future, when we actually look at where things are and what we do, and we're looking at results. We're trying to see if we follow that pathway, where we might be going over the long term. A yellow brick road is this sense of, let's see if we try and work without current procedures and processes and tried and tested approaches, what would happen if we try and be open to learning new insights rather than delivering specific results. So these are three on the compliance sides. And then on the more rebellious sides, we have the scuba dive, the recon mission, and the eyes on the horizon, where we're detached from current best practices and we're open to finding new approaches. Finally, we have this interplay between results and insights. So on the results side, focusing on delivering results, specific things we want to achieve, as feet on the ground, a scuba dive, and a window to the future. And if we're interested in learning, then we have three game plans on the learning side, and that yellow brick road, the recon mission, and the eyes on the horizon. So three different ways to slice and dice, so to speak, these game plans. And each game plan gives you a unique combination of opportunity frame, of organizational culture, what is the blueprint for bringing people together, and organizational design, whether we're focused on results or on learning. And with this in mind, I say game on, and thank you very much.
Dimo, thank you very much indeed. There's so much to take in there. I want to ask, and forgive me if this is a very simplistic question, but I want to ask, should people watching this and considering your insights see this more by way as a potential checklist to refer back to, or to use almost one of your own metaphors, a training schedule? This is how to train their mind into sharper, more structured thinking.
It's a great question. Thank you, Greg. It could actually be both. It could be used for training and see, are we able to switch between short-term and long-term thinking? We're able to switch between focusing on compliance, on the checklist of things, versus trying to let and be more free in how we approach certain tasks. And we focus on results versus focusing on learning. So it's a good training opportunity. But in terms of performance, that was the first part of your question. It's also a good way of reflecting on what is going on. And it could be that we're trying to do something, results are not quite coming in, and you could say, well, actually, it looks like feet on the ground is not quite working. We're not seem to be getting the results we want. Why don't we try a scuba dive? And let's say maybe there's a different way of approaching a problem, still focus on the same results that we want to achieve in the short term. Or if it's, let's turn that into a recon mission and see what learnings and insights could be. So that what this does first, perhaps most of all, it gives people a language that they can come together and they understand. If you say scuba dive, people can begin to understand what is it that they do. And it's not dissimilar to during a football game, someone taking a corner kick and holding their hand up and saying two, and everybody knows what two means. It's situation number two, and they know exactly where the ball is going to go and exactly the configuration with which they're going to attack the penalty. the penalty area and the goal. And so that keeps everybody on the same page.
What about those for whom, and I'll frame it this way, a theoretical, iterative, dare I say almost academic, but a learning approach to entrepreneurialism is quite out of step with their own intuitive, untutored in a sense. It's almost the unfearful approach that people who are less experienced, and it's why young people tend to be or can be such great entrepreneurs. They don't know what they don't know, that as a means of driving propulsively entrepreneurialism is actually extremely successful. How does that work within your more structured environment?
Well, I mean, I would take back. We don't know whether the more intuitive approaches that you mentioned. We don't know whether this is what leads to people being extremely successful. We know that there are successful people following these approaches. But one of my roles, being in a university, thinking about entrepreneurship as an academic subject, is precisely to try and understand entrepreneurial success by looking at the picture from across all the entrepreneurial journeys. And to give you an example, if we set 100 ships to sail across the sea, and then one ship is going to make it, and the other one, may crash on the rocks, the ship that's going to make it is going to write the book about how I crossed the Atlantic. You see, and it's very difficult to counterfactual, to test our own understanding of why we succeed. And this is where a broader understanding, but more reflective sense of what we're doing. And just to give you another one of our roles, what we try to do at the University of Bath in approaching the teaching of entrepreneurship is we wouldn't expect that people would say, I'm going to become an architect and I'm going to follow my intuition. I'll become an engineer and follow my intuition. There is a sense in which we can think about professional knowledge that becomes part of what being an entrepreneur is. Except we don't quite think of entrepreneur as a profession, but there is a way in which we could think of that. And this theoretical knowledge, this ability to reflect, this ability to understand where we are in the journey, what we're trying to do in the market, how do we tackle the world as this big system in which we try to make an impact. This is exactly part of that, the toolbox of such professional knowledge.
You're right to pull me up at the very beginning there, very gently about correlation doesn't imply causation. Absolutely, completely get that. I mentioned at the beginning of this EntreConf journey some hours ago today about the difficulty that many entrepreneurs have. They're time poor. They don't have time to think, to reflect anywhere near in terms of time, let alone as deeply as you have done just now. Come to you personally. When do you think best, and why?
Personally, other than the mornings, just because your mind is fresh, I find that the best place and time for me to think is on an airplane, airport or an airplane. It's simply because you're disconnected from everything else, and no one, there's a time in which no one can reach you, and you don't have to respond to firefight current issues, and this becomes a space where you can be alone with your mind, so to speak. So this is really a pure place for thinking. For some reason, we don't appreciate, perhaps, we don't put a lot of emphasis on thinking. And in fact, if we see someone thinking, we might say, well, they're not doing anything. We tend to associate thinking with not doing anything. So is this sense that if I'm thinking I'm not doing anything, if I have to be doing something, then I have to occupy myself with other things, which naturally displaces thinking. It raises an interesting question about how do we learn to recognize and value and actually recognize that thinking is doing. Thinking it can keep you quite busy.
Thinking is work. Thinking is about, the whole construct of an entrepreneur is envisaging futures which don't exist and then building that future, and that starts with thought, I guess. Is that right at the heart of it? I do want to press this point about time, because it's probably the one asset that can't be leveraged by however clever an entrepreneur there may be. But how can entrepreneurs, when they're on that cycle, on that roller coaster of activity, of responding, of building, of pivoting, of whatever else, how can they break that cycle of the inevitability of short-termism, whether bootstrap or seeking to grasp opportunities? It's hard not to focus disproportionately on the immediate rather than on the important.
It's a great question, and not sure if my insight is going to be groundbreaking, but that in a way requires discipline of setting time aside for being away from the more pressing issues of the day. I mean, as it happens, there are quite a lot of things that are urgent and not necessarily important. So having the ability to recognize these and to understand if actually, if you don't respond today, if you actually respond tomorrow on certain things, and try to be really protective of that space where you can reflect. We can reflect on the day and think about the day after it, but not always be in the swing of things. In the swing of things, we're always responding. So that means that we're not really in control, because we have to bat away the balls that are sent our way, and that's perhaps we need the respite of what do they have in tennis when you have a break after every 2 games, or the break between the sets. And that's something that's in the rules of tennis, obviously, but it's something that we have to have the discipline to create for ourselves.
Yeah, again, strictly metaphorically, we all need monasteries, I guess, in some way, some place of contemplation. And for you, it may well be a plane trip or whatever. I want to come back to this point about the entrepreneurs clearly can't leverage time. It's one of the few non-fungible realities of business. But entrepreneurs can leverage thinking by articulating strategies and values, by employing people with smarter execution skills, better capabilities than they have. So as well as the techniques and approaches you've discussed, isn't part of the solution to the problem of time to surround yourself with great people? It sounds trite, but that strikes me as right at the heart of what it is to grow a business.
This is, again, an excellent point. And if we think about the pressures of time, then we're limited to that single dimension. That we have, we have 5 minutes, we have 10 minutes. But once we recognize that behind that single dimension, there are other dimensions in terms of within the 5 minutes, you can actually be working with other people. We can leveraging the knowledge of others. You can leverage networks and relationships. And in this way, as it happens, you can do a lot more in the 5 minutes or the hour or the day than you would otherwise. So yes, this is how do you leverage things in a way that go way beyond yourself.
Yeah, and a last point really is this: your insights and advice today are framed around entrepreneurs as per your rationale, your role at the university. But I wondered, thinking about our earlier discussions about investors in the funding round, but it came through in other sections as well. Would investors benefit from having an enhanced awareness of time balancing, of prioritizing, of not simply being driven by that either immediacy or singularity of return?
They would, and perhaps the best way to make that point is that one of the ways in which we tend to describe venture capital is different from other forms of funding, is the first characteristic of venture capital is supposed to be patient capital. So the top tier VC investors, understanding the cycle of the venture capital investment, is understanding that the journey of a venture happens on a cycle. In a similar way, the journey of a fund is over a cycle. And so having the patience to have a 10-year horizon over the exit, having the patience to understand that the journey involves rough waters, and things are not quite going in a linear way as you might expect, and the results would happen down the line. This is not a very easy thing to do, but investors could be educated perhaps not the right words, but to understand that this requires patience. It's a bit like, we can't force wine. Wine needs to have its process for the grapes to work and ferment. And we can't force it. So in a similar way, we have to let that venture and the effort breed and find its way. And that requires patience.
Dimo, as ever, there's much to digest here, much wisdom and very careful thinking. And for all of us, this will be on the EntreConf's YouTube site shortly. And I do think it'd be well worth watching and also sharing this wisdom. I think that's principle of entrepreneurism being an art and a skill, a fusion of the two, that it is through tuitional techniques, through analysis, through metaphors from scuba diving to yellow brick roads or whatever, that this is something which can be enhanced. Our thinking can be enhanced. Last year's session was about how our thinking could be profoundly changed by different modes of thinking. This is a form of enhancement to refine the why we do what we do and how we do it more particularly. I think it's been really stimulating, Dimo, and thank you very much for joining us today from Bulgaria, from whenever. Delighted to see you. Thank you very much to Professor Dimo Dimov and the University of Bath School of Management. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.